people then start going, so why aren't they telling? They announce a change, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever it might be, and nothing more's been said about it. And I think people then, that uncertainty creeps in, worry creeps in.
And we fill that gap, don't we?
We fill the gap,
with
we fill the gap.
Rumours, conjecture.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hello, this is Rich.
Hi, this is Graham.
And today the question is, how do you keep everything going when the team know that bigger changes are coming? Ooh. So there's some bigger changes looming. How do we keep people focused and going? Graham, where should we start?
Well, I think change, I guess the bigger changes suggest that perhaps change has happened already, are people going through more than one change? But maybe we'll cover off some of that stuff. I think for me, if the team know bigger changes are coming, something's been discussed already, something's been said. And I think as leaders, we need to acknowledge, the elephant in the room, whatever we want to call it. We need to acknowledge that it's out there that changes, more change, bigger change is coming. So I think first of all,
you're saying first of all we need to acknowledge it.
Acknowledge it, yeah. Let people know that. Let people know that it is coming, whatever it might be, but be clear about what it's going to look like. So, what is it that we can share right now? And again, let's recognise if it's a significant organisational change, perhaps we can't share everything, and perhaps we don't know. Perhaps we don't know everything just yet. It might be that we've an idea of where we want to get to, the future we want to create, but the steps to get there haven't been fully agreed just yet.
Because this can be quite difficult, can't it? Because I've seen examples of this where people knew a bigger change was coming, and many of them feared for their jobs in that. So
Yes.
So I guess what you're saying here is be honest, share what you do know and you can talk about in an attempt to try and just keep people focused and keep them, doing as much as they can so they're as productive as they can.
Yeah, because I think over the years that kind of I've been working, certainly, if any organisation mentions restructuring, I think the first thing most people think is, therefore we will lose jobs. Therefore we will lose people. Yeah. Someone's going to go, and that leads us to this spiral of, and will that person be me? So I think there are certain words, because we've seen loads of restructures where people have lost their jobs. Yeah, we make connections that might not be there this time around. A restructure could mean we're taking on more people.
Yeah,
it could mean we're keeping the people. It could mean we're moving around some of the teams. It might mean people are leaving, but I think the first thought a lot of people have nowadays is restructuring means job loss. Then the next connection people make is, will it be me? And I think with most things to do with change, it's this whole thing about, is it real or is it perceived?
Yeah. And I guess in this instance, you wouldn't know 100%, would you? No. Whether it was real or perceived. But what I think what you're sort of saying is, but let's be honest about what we do know. Let's be honest about the direction of travel, so people can start to try and make sense of that and quieten any. It might not quieten the self-talk completely, but you're trying to give certainty, aren't you? We've talked about it many times before.
Yes,
try and give us as much certainty as you can. So where do you stand then on, sort of communication with this? Should I keep talking and keep communicating regularly, even if nothing's changed, or should I just wait until I've got some concrete information that I can communicate? What do I do there?
I think communicating more rather than less is typically always a good thing. I think the reason sometimes why we don't communicate is because we have a gap that we can't fill yet. So we kind of go, let's not communicate because we have nothing new to say. Yeah. And I think that lack of communication becomes a challenge because people then start going, so why aren't they telling? They announce a change, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever it might be, and nothing more has been said about it. And I think people then, that uncertainty creeps in, worry creeps in.
And we fill that gap, don't we?
We fill the gap, yeah. We fill the gap.
Rumours, conjecture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I worked with one organisation many years ago, and the phrase that somebody used was, "We have a fantastic grapevine here," in terms of the stuff that goes through their organisation travels almost at the speed of light through the informal networks.
Yeah.
But the reality was, a lot of that information would be gossip or conjecture. And therefore, I think as leaders in the business, we need to take control of the communication by going and doing it regularly. Even if there's not much new to add, reinforcing the reason why the change is happening, reinforcing what the future looks like, reinforcing the new stuff you can share. And I think the thing for me is, if you know there's a gap in your communication, acknowledge there's a gap. So let people know we don't know about this particular piece of the change yet. Let them know when you will know or when you expect to know. So we don't know about, we don't know what the formal structures are going to look like in this change. We expect that decision will have been made by this date, and on this date we will communicate out what it looks like. And when that date comes around, and I think the challenge sometimes with some organizations is when that date comes around, they have nothing new to say, so they don't bother communicating. As opposed to going, we expected to have the answers to this by this date. We haven't got them. The new deadline for this is, whatever the new deadline looks like. Because whenever there's a gap in your communication, or whenever you say to somebody you will tell them something, and that date comes around and you haven't told them, people will start to speculate. And again, my belief is, more often than not, we go down the, why aren't they telling us stuff? They aren't telling us because it's bad news.
Yeah, there must be something wrong.
Yeah, so definitely keep communicating, even if you don't have all the answers.
You make me think of one leader I've worked with quite closely over the years. And this particular person there'd been multiple changes happened. There were more coming. Everybody knew there were more coming. And one of the things that they did was to communicate regularly, like you've just said, but also be really honest about what they knew and what they didn't know. And, he was quite open, and he also showed some vulnerability in it, because one of the things that he did was talk about, there were certain things that made him uncomfortable. I asked him about it and said, what was you thinking behind that? Because, do you think that might have made people nervous, that you're unsure? And he said, I've thought long and hard about that. He said, but the thing is, some of these people, because people were going to go, and people knew that. Knew it because it was obvious rather than because it had been said. He said, one, I want people that stay to work for me, and I need them to respect me in order to do that. People that go, I also want to be here for them and feel that they also respect me, so I can try and help them either in the future or whatever. And I thought it was really interesting, because he'd worked out that he'd got to be a human being and support the people that he got around him. And that meant through this difficult period, he'd got to be as honest as he could in order to do that. And, and I think, having spoken to many people since those events, people that stayed and people that didn't, the one thing that comes out for that leader in particular is that they all respect him for the way he handled it. And that might not be in the manual, but I thought it was a really, really interesting personal way of dealing with it.
Yeah, and I think there's something in there. You think you mentioned the word in that, Rich, but there's something there about him showing a degree of vulnerability. And I think as leaders, I think the moods changed towards this, by the way, in terms of, I think there was a time when leaders had to be strong, and, the perception of a leader being worried or concerned about something was not a good thing. You've got to be strong for the people, you've got to kind of keep a brave face, whatever the right phrase is.
Strength,
around there.
Confidence.
Yeah. And I think as we've moved kind of on, I think increasingly there's an acceptance that leaders are people too, and they will have some concerns. And actually, from a vulnerability point of view, showing your vulnerability, discussing some things with your team, and it might not be everything, by the way, but having that kind of discussing some things with the team, in terms of, I've got some concern about this, and it's these. Opening up that kind of dialogue, I think, is really helpful in kind of creating that that piece we talked about, we talk about quite a lot, the psychological safety within the team. Because if I can see my leader, my manager being open about their thoughts and feelings, that will make me more likely to open up about my thoughts and feelings. And I think that's really helpful from that psychological safety point of view that we do that. So I think there's been a change. Like I say, 20 years ago, probably leaders wouldn't have done that. I think where we are today, it's kind of acknowledged that it can be helpful.
I wonder if there'll be a change back, though. I'm just thinking about some world leaders that we've got where actually everything is all about projecting strength and knowing everything and being the all-seeing, all-knowing, which clearly they can't be. And, we know is not necessarily all that helpful all the time. Now, I'm not saying it's not at times. The strength and confidence, I'm not saying it's not important. It is. But I just wonder, because you see lots of organisations are pivoting the way they're doing things to try and ensure that they're on the good side of some of these world leaders, so we're going to pivot and we're going to operate in a different way, or we're going to have different attitudes towards things. So I wonder whether some of that might have a knock-on impact to the way that many of the leaders operate.
It could well do, and I guess we'll see. I don't know what over the next maybe 12 months or so in terms of how that plays out. And I think leadership styles. I'm going to use the phrase trends, but I guess trends in the way we lead and the way we manage, they change over time. They I'm sure they've changed more than once. Kind of prior to us being managers and leaders in organisations, and they'll change again. And sometimes, I think one of the challenges with change sometimes it feels like we go back to a way of doing things that people have seen previously. If I think about my time, I started out my career in banking, and you kind of go, when I started out in banking, you had local branches, you had local branches that had kind of a full range of staff. You could call your local branch, and then that all changed. And then, it was regionalized call centers. Call centers went internationally. Your branches had very few staff in them. And then it kind of went the other way again, and the recognition that we need to go back to more of a full branch. And so I think you see trends in everything, and I'm sure leadership's one of those things that will, we could well see a move again. And it'll be interesting to see what the impact then is on those organisations that perhaps have encouraged more openness and more psychological safety, if their people perceive it to be going a different way again.
I suppose there's different generations in the workforce as well that will have different appetite for different types of leadership.
Definitely.
But I think maybe one of the things that's come through in this conversation, for me, as I've been reflecting as we talk, is be true to yourself as a person and as a leader.
Yeah.
Like the example that I was giving, that person did. They didn't say, okay, what does the company want me to say? They never broke any confidences ever that the company had. He clearly knew more than he could say, but knew he couldn't say it. But what he did do is he thought about his own values as a person, and he tried to treat people with respect through the process. So I think whether leadership styles change and different generations in the workforce, that clearly changes.
Yeah.
I think that is a really key message for me, which is, keep the confidence as you need to, because that's part of your job as a leader, but be true to your own values in the way that you deal with people.
Yeah, and I think people understand, don't they? You work in an organisation, you understand there'll be certain times when you can't be told everything. There'll be certain times when your managers, your leaders will know more than you know. That for me is a given. And it's I guess the difference between the leaders, the person that you mentioned, and kind of their approach to leadership is you've probably got teams who report into people like that going, we respect that person, therefore we know they're telling us everything that they can tell us right now. If you don't have that level of relationship, I think that what happens is the narrative changes, and the narrative becomes they're keeping something from us, as opposed to we know they can't tell us that. And I think with a lot of this stuff, in terms of how you keep things going when change is kind of on the horizon, or change is coming, or you're starting to deal with a change, one of the things is how do we, I'm going to use the phrase control the narrative. Control, maybe not quite the right word.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, though.
But how do we make sure that, we are communicating regularly with the messages we want people to hear that will help them to move forward? How do we keep communicating that, that demonstrates we're making progress with the change, that we're finding out new stuff, we're changing new stuff. And the other one that perhaps we've not talked about so far is also how do we involve people? So maybe so far we've been talking about it from the leader's perspective in terms of communicating the change out, but actually there'll probably come a point when involving the people affected by the change in terms of creating what the future looks like can make us have a significant positive impact on how people embrace what the future looks like.
Because you're transferring some ownership back and you're getting people involved. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Graham. I think we'll make some changes to the way that we end the podcast. And I'll just say to you,
I'm not sure I like that, by the way.
Change is bad, don't do it. So make some changes to the way we end it. And I'll say, if you got one big piece of advice, what would it be? On this topic, by the way, not in life in general. On this topic.
I think it's a communication piece. Communicate. What I've learned as a manager and leader over the years is keeping people involved by sharing information. It is one of the most important things you can do. That would be my one thing. I'm going to bat it back to you then. What would your one thing be? And you can't have mine.
Be true to your values, be true to who you are, and see it through that lens as well.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organisation, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.